Welcome everyone to another edition of Play It Through, and on this edition it's A Week of Garfield, brought to us by Towa Chiki. A Week of Garfield is a Famicom exclusive game starring Garfield, the comic strip cat, and was only released in Japan. It was not released in North America or Europe due to licensing. This is actually the third Garfield-related video game to be released, with the other two being on home computer systems of the time. The first Garfield game to get any sort of North American console release was Garfield Labyrinth for the Game Boy, and that game was just a reskinned version of a Mickey Mouse title from Japan that was actually also reskinned as a Ghostbusters game in Europe. Very weird things when it comes to the licensing of Garfield titles. The first Garfield game I really remember though was Garfield Caught in the Act for the Sega Genesis, which that game alone also has a pretty interesting history. However, this game, A Week of Garfield, is not a very good game. That's to say the absolute least. You can probably kind of tell that just by looking at it. The game is a pretty simple platformer, where obviously we're playing as Garfield trying to save Odie, who for some reason was kidnapped by evil alley cats. John is of absolutely no use to us, giving us one line of dialogue between the stages, and other than that, doesn't end up helping us out. So it's up to Garfield in order to explore, take out enemies, and go through the game's multiple levels. Controls are simple. You're able to jump, you can change what weapon you currently have equipped using select, and then press the other button in order to attack. You have a limited supply, of course, of your ammunition when you pick it up via the different item icons that end up appearing just in random places. Now these are set every time you play the game, so you can kind of learn the locations of them, but you do have to kind of like jump into them, or at least walk into them for them to appear, and then you have to also grab them. Outside of the ones that represent weapons, there are a few other items, including coffee and the like that ends up increasing your health back, as well as the speed boots, which will make you go faster. There's also the fish bones, which will decrease your health, so you want to make sure, of course, to avoid them. The game has no invincibility frames, so every time you run into an enemy, you can get bounced off of them multiple times to have your health drained in just a second or so. This makes the game pretty much a nightmare to play your first couple of times, until you get used to kind of how the enemies work. Now, Garfield has a default attack. He's able to kick by just pressing the attack button with no other weapon selected. The thing about this kick, though, is it works all the time, even if you're in the air jumping, just like you can attack with the bone or the exploding pie or whatever it's supposed to be. Either way, you can actually attack in the air using the kick, and knowing this, and knowing exactly kind of where the hit frame, or the hitbox is, which is basically right at about the stomach level of Garfield, this will allow you to attack enemies with no weapon equipped and jumping through the stage. You can of course also just straight up kick when walking on the ground. Now, one downfall though is if you duck in the game, which will allow you to of course crawl and get underneath a lot of the enemies, this will also stop you from being able to attack. You have to actually stand up and then you'll be able to attack again. If you're in the crouching position and jump, you won't be able to attack, so keep that in mind. Like I said, this game is pretty much a mess. There isn't a lot of strategy, though, involved in the game. It's just go from left to right and get the key at the end of the area to open up the door. The key is always at the very end. It's in a random spot on each screen, and sometimes it can be very difficult to locate. It's one of those things that you'll probably jump at the same spot multiple times before finally getting it to appear. You just have to hit it in that exact right pixel in order for it to happen sometimes. A lot of my strategy is getting the boots as much as possible to kind of speed things up. You're able to outrun a lot of the enemies. Certain enemies, like the birds, the worst enemy in this game, don't go away necessarily if they are still on screen when they bounce off the walls. Sometimes you can kind of outrun them and get them to disappear, but for the most part the birds will stay with you, and they're very annoying. They take at least 3 kicks in order to defeat. They take multiple attacks from all the other weapons. Your 3 weapons besides the kick are the bone, which is just a straight shot out, the pies that explode when they hit the ground, shedding out a spread shot, but in 4 directions upwards, not straight up though, they're in diagonal directions, making it sometimes difficult to hit enemies with it. And then there's the spread shot, which you're able to do the final weapon there, which I think is food. I think it's cat food. You're able to kind of throw that out in front of you, which also can damage multiple enemies with each shot. Like I said, though, you get limited ammo, and sometimes it can be very difficult to try to hit multiple of these enemies. A lot of times I try to only have one or maybe two birds on screen before trying to attempt to grab the key at the end of an area. At the end of certain stages, you do have a boss encounter. There's only one boss. He's just kind of changed up a little bit each time. Basically, different colorations of this evil alley cat that we have to deal with. This key can be a little bit difficult to get because you have to use the ladder in the background in order to grab it. Most of the other enemies, like the frogs, the small little bugs, the mice, they can just be deflected backwards. Anytime you end up hitting them, they will end up kind of going the opposite direction unless you hit them with enough damage to instantly defeat them. A lot of times if you're just walking on the ground straight forward, you can use your kick to deflect any of the mice that come straight running at you. When it comes to these bosses, a lot of times it's just get equipped your weapon. Usually I prefer the bone because it's a straight shot out, and then I just mash the attack button quickly in order to try to defeat him. There really isn't a whole lot of strategy because you can't avoid his projectiles, you can deflect some of his projectiles, but for a lot of time if you just spend your time trying to dodge, the projectiles they fire out can hit you multiple times due to no invincibility frames, and thus you can die so quickly. I find, like I said, the best strategy is just kind of fire away and hope that you end up winning. At the top of the screen, besides the weapon that we have equipped, you have your health, the current score that we have, as well as the day that it currently is. As, of course, we're playing A Week of Garfield, we're going through an actual week, though there are more levels than there are days in the week, because a couple of the levels are on the same day. Though we do get to see everyone all the way through Sunday here. Growing up, I was a big fan of Garfield. I was one of those kids that, for whatever reason, I loved the cartoon every single morning or afternoon, depending upon where it aired, on what channel and syndication. As well as I would buy the Garfield books, the comic books that were like the trade books, featuring, you know, months and months worth of Garfield comics, from my local Walden Books at the mall, right next to KB Toys, of course. So plenty of nostalgia when I think of Garfield. Garfield Caught in the Act, when I finally got a chance to play on the Sega Genesis, became one of my favorite games of the time, just because I love Garfield so much, even though it's not that great of a game, except it is so much better than this. Though, honestly, this is the kind of game I probably would have played over and over and over again had I actually had it when I was young. I'm also a big fan of other comic strips and stuff, Peanuts, Calvin and Hobbes, all that classic Americana comic strips from, like, you know, 60s and all that lasted forever. Just a fan of it existing. Maybe not a fan of every single comic strip, of course, but especially Peanuts, Garfield, Calvin and Hobbes are top-notch. And recently I got to read a bunch of trades of Asterix, and there's a lot of really cool European comics that I really enjoy as well. And a lot of those ended up getting video games, so it all ties together over the years. I actually highly recommend some of the Asterix platformers if you like classic platformers. Much better than this one. I wish I had more strategy to really talk about with A Week of Garfield, but unfortunately there just really isn't a whole lot to it because it's so poor. A lot of it's luck as far as being able to survive. Like I said, bosses, like for example this guy here, we're just going to fire away. If we run out of ammunition, it can be very tricky. In the upper corner with your weaponry, it will blink when you're getting low on ammo, so you know that you're low and that you're going to either need to switch or you're about to run out, so be ready to dodge, because if you run out of ammunition and you're just using your kick, and you're standing a little bit away from one of these bosses, they can easily hit you with a couple of projectiles fast and you end up dying. Thankfully, though, we are getting near the end of the game. I know we've only been playing for a little bit of time, but it feels like forever at this point, doesn't it? Because of the weird kind of licensing with Garfield in general, as the video games that have come out over the years, there's never been, like, a great Garfield game. They've been released so sporadically by, like, usually, like, you know, not the biggest developer or publisher by any means. I mean, just look at this title. Garfield Caught in the Act, which was, I think, Sega actually helped put out. was a bigger title, you know, bigger developer, but the rest of them, there was ones for the DS and even Nintendo Wii, and one based on the Garfield show. Just not necessarily the best titles. If you have played Garfield games, what's your favorite? Let me know down in the comments below. I like to see if there's actually really good Garfield games that somehow I just haven't played over the years. One of my favorite lines in this game is coming up at the end of the stage. As you've noticed, every time you beat a level, you just run into John, and John's like, keep going, or, you know, where's Odie, or whatever, which is not very helpful. But here, he just says, keep looking. Thanks, John. Why don't you help? You are completely incapable of doing anything of value. Does John do anything of value in the comic strip at all? As much as I love Garfield as a comic, like, does John ever do anything? We are on Sunday, though, the last day of the week, though it's broken up into multiple levels. This is where things get out of hand with the birds. There are multiple times where you can have 4 or more of these things kind of get on screen at once. I think only 4 potential enemies can appear on screen at once, so you can kind of get ones not to spawn if you're able to outrun the birds a little bit. But if they start to gang up a little bit, you don't have the boot, use your weapons, use your projectiles to kind of keep them away, or just kind of jump in the air a little bit and mash that kick button. Like I said, even though you don't see the animation of Garfield kicking in the air, he still is. I also feel like not a whole lot of effort was put into the backgrounds here, like the foods just on the door and stuff, like just a random word, it's not even centered. Like, at least the restaurant window, at least they kind of put it in the center so it looks right, but the other things were foods in the background. They just kind of like, let's just put a word on a door, that looks right. Like, kids won't care. So here we go, we're on to the last level, and he just says, let's challenge! Let's challenge what? The final boss? How about you do? How about you do that, John? How about you challenge the final boss? But this is the final level. There's a few areas here that we're going to travel through. Once again, just like the last level, there's a decent amount of enemies. Thankfully, it starts off pretty easy. You may want to build up some of your supplies as far as your attack weapons are concerned if you don't have a whole lot of them. If you've kind of been bulldozing your way through the levels. This way you have plenty of ammunition going into the boss encounter. Just like the other bosses, it's the same thing where we're just going to be mashing the attack, basically. So, yeah, keep that in mind. One thing, though, that I really loved going back into the annals of the NES and the Famicom's history, though, was finding stuff like A Week of Garfield, licensed games, weird oddities that just for some reason never came to North America, such as the fact they actually have a game based on the movie Major League that has very little to do with the movie by any means, but it does have the logo from the movie. It is some references and stuff in there included from that, but was only released in Japan, not really surprisingly, and it's not really much more than just a standard NES baseball title, but just the fact that it existed was an interesting thing to me. Now when we make it over here, you can see Odie in the background, just kind of hanging out there, just kind of stuck. He won't come out until we defeat the boss coming up. So as we move a little bit forward, here's the boss. Pretty much the same as the ones we've dealt with. We're just going to stay in here and mash the attack button using the bones that we've gathered throughout the course of the game. Once he is defeated, we can go through the door. Odie is saved. Now I just want to stay in here, just watch this animation of Odie. It's hysterical. Like that, just couple of frames of animation just make me laugh every time. When you finally had enough of that great animation, you can end the game here. Just go to the end. It's like, yay, congratulations, boys! Yeah, congratulations that I saved Odie. Like, was that, like, what? Thanks, John. That's very helpful. And then John tells us all the credits, so I guess he is knowledgeable, at least. He does know everybody who made this game, so that's what he's contributed. He gives us one line of dialogue per level and the people that made the game. So, there you go. A Week of Garfield for the Nintendo Famicom. But anyway, guys, it's going to wrap up this episode of Play It Through. I'd like to thank you for watching, and of course, I hope you enjoyed.